My name is Paulette Rios, lifetime donor of Paralyzed Veterans of America, lest they not be forgotten. PFC Wagner, Wayne Douglas, U.S. Marine Corps, Porterville. PFC Wagner, Richard Allen, U.S. Marine Corps, Stockton. PVT Wagner, John Lawrence, U.S. Army, Daly City. Sergeant Wagner, Russell Mark, U.S. Marine Corps, Vallejo. SK-1 Wagner, Robert K., U.S. Navy, Barstow. SP-4 Walber, Ronald James, U.S. Army, Nevada City. PFC Waldron, Dwayne Everett, U.S. Army, Englewood. PFC Waldron, George Allen, U.S. Army, San Jose. S.A. Waldron, Stephen, U.S. Navy, Baldwin Park. PVT Waldrop, Ronald Terry, U.S. Army, Santee. 2LT Walker, James Daniel, U.S. Army, Santa Maria. CPL Walker, George Thomas Lloyd, U.S. Army, Los Angeles. CPL Walker, Thomas Michael, U.S. Army, Richmond. CPL Walker, Thomas James, U.S. Marine Corps, San Jose. M.A.J. Walker, William John, U.S. Marine Corps, Riverside. PFC Walker, Michael Frederick, U.S. Army, Chico. PFC Walker, John Wesley, U.S. Marine Corps, Orange. PVT Walker, Gary Laney, U.S. Marine Corps, Cudahy. SP-4 Walker, Larry Allen, U.S. Army, Denair. SP-4 Walker, Thomas Ray, U.S. Army, Los Angeles. SP-4 Walker, Clifford Wayne, U.S. Army, Mountain View. SP-4 Walker, Jerry Lee, U.S. Army, Porterville. PFC Walker Jr., James Edward, U.S. Army, Pacifica. CPL Walkinshaw, George Myron, U.S. Marine Corps, Long Beach. LCDR Wall, Paul Everett, U.S. Navy, Buena Park. PFC Wallace, Michael D., U.S. Army, Huntington Beach. PVT Wallace, Arnold Bryan, U.S. Army, San Leandro. SP-5 Walker, John Buzzy, U.S. Army, Berkeley. SP-4 Wall Rod, Richard Arthur, U.S. Army, Los Angeles. H.N. Walters, John Bradley, U.S. Navy, Long Beach. SGT Walters, William E., U.S. Army, San Diego. SP-4 Walters, Donald Wesley, U.S. Army, Southgate. TSGT Waltman, Jesse Lilo, U.S. Air Force, Dixon. SGT Walton, Craig Leslie, U.S. Marine Corps, San Jose. Welcome home. PFC Wayne Maker, Danny Wayne, U.S. Army, Los Angeles. CPL Juan Bro, Ronald Nelson, U.S. Army, Torrance. PFC Wandro James Matthew, U.S. Marine Corps San Mateo. LCPL Wagner Lossie Ray, U.S. Marine Corps Alameda. Captain Ward Patrick Michael, U.S. Army Arcadia. CPL Ward Robert David, U.S. Marine Corps USAPA. LTC Ward George Warren, U.S. Marine Corps San Diego. PFC Ward Dennis Charles, U.S. Army Baldwin Park. PFC Ward Robert William, U.S. Army Concord. SP4 Ward Danny Edward, U.S. Army Downey. SSGT Ward James Craig, U.S. Army McKinleyville. MGEN Ware Keith Lincoln, U.S. Army Los Angeles. SP4 Wharf Lawrence Robert, U.S. Army Visalia. 2LT Warmbrough John Frederick, U.S. Marine Corps Santa Monica. 2LT Warner Charles William F., U.S. Marine Corps Santa Monica. PFC Warner Jr. Herbert Alvin, U.S. Marine Corps Long Beach. SP4 Warnock Robert Morrell, U.S. Army Elka John. Sergeant Walnerman Claus, U.S. Army Carmel. Sergeant Warren Donald Albert, U.S. Marine Corps San Diego. PFC Warrington Jr. Charles W., U.S. Army Woodland Hills. LCPL Washburn Robert Glenn, U.S. Marine Corps California City. SP4 Washburn Johnny Lee, U.S. Army Azusa. Sergeant Watanabe James Roshiro, U.S. Army Oxnard. PFC Watkins Sheridan J., U.S. Army Cottonwood. PFC Watkins David Eugene, U.S. Army Los Alamitos. PFC Watkins Martin Lee, U.S. Army San Diego. CPL Watson JV, U.S. Army Los Angeles. CWO Watson James Osmond, U.S. Marine Corps Bonsaley. CWO Watson James Edward, U.S. Army Porterville. PFC Watson Stanley Eugene, U.S. Army Anderson. PFC Watson Thomas Edward, U.S. Army Los Angeles. PFC Watson Wilmer, U.S. Army Seaside. Sergeant Watson Leslie James, U.S. Army Los Angeles. SP4 Watson Alfonso, U.S. Army Los Angeles. Very emotional. Welcome home. SP4 Watson Ronald R., U.S. Army Santa Ana. PFC makes you cry. PFC Watson Jr., Arthur, U.S. Marine Corps, Los Angeles, SSGT Watterson, Dennis Ray, U.S. Army, Oildale, Sergeant Watts, Thomas Roger, U.S. Army, Los Angeles, SPS Watts, Thomas James, U.S. Army, Anaheim, CPL Wa, Randall Michael, U.S. Marine Corps, Paramount, CPL Waysack, William John, U.S. Army, Orange, SP4 Weatherly, Jackie Don, U.S. Army, Sacramento, PFC Weatherby, Ernest Murrell, U.S. Army, Sacramento, LCPL Weaver, Doyle Wayne, U.S. Marine Corps, Venice, Sergeant Weaver, Richard Allen, U.S. Army, Woodland Hills, SP4 Weaver, Timothy Patrick, U.S. Army, Montclair, CPL Webb, Donald Ray, U.S. Army, Grass Valley, 1LT Weber, Brian L., U.S. Marine Corps, San Diego, SP4 Weber, Scott Stillman, U.S. Army, Los Angeles, PFC Weber, Raymond N., U.S. Army, Livermore, Sergeant Weber, Paul Frederick, U.S. Army, Levin Grove, SP4 Weber, David Gerald, U.S. Army, Chico, SP4 Weber, Patrick, U.S. Army, San Francisco, CPL Weebold, John Charles, U.S. Army, Modesto, PFC Webster, Wilbur Michael, U.S. Marine Corps, East Palo Alto, PFC Weber, Rena Charles, U.S. Marine Corps, Long Beach, PFC Webster, Howard Gregory, U.S. Army, Riverside, Sergeant Webster Christopher, U.S. Army, not listed, SP4 Webster Frank Anthony, U.S. Army, Los Angeles, CPO Weddendorf, Robert George, U.S. Army, Englewood, PFC Wedlow, Kenneth Edwin, U.S. Army, Compton, SP 5, Wedman, Kenneth Albert, U.S. Army, Newark, CPOE Donald Edmond, U.S. Marine Corps, Port Hueneme, SP 5, Weeder, Richard D., U.S. Army, Chula Vista, SP 5, Weekly, Clifford Wayne, U.S. Army, Bellflower, Captain Weger Jr. John, U.S. Air Force, San Fernando, PFC Weber, James Elroy, U.S. Army, Colton, PFC Wedemere, Peter Joseph, U.S. Marine Corps, Alameda. Welcome home, heroes. SP4 WEIGT Widget, Stephen Len, U.S. Army, Cloverdale, TSGT Wecal Jr., William Bryan, U.S. Air Force, Englewood, LCPL Wheel Jr., Richard Anthony, U.S. Marine Corps Anaheim, SP4 Weir, John Randolph, U.S. Army Norfolk.